Picture this: a creature so majestic, it defies the very laws of nature, soaring through the skies with wings that catch the sunlight like liquid silver. For thousands of years, Pegasus has captured our imaginations, appearing in ancient myths, modern movies, and even whispered campfire tales. But here's the twist: everything you think you know about this legendary winged horse might be wrong. From his dramatic birth to his supposed immortality, Pegasus is shrouded in myths that have twisted the truth over centuries. Today, we're setting the record straight by busting 30 of the most stubborn myths about this iconic creature. Did you know Pegasus wasn't always the symbol of purity and light, or that his wings might not have looked the way Hollywood insists? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll see Pegasus in a whole new light, and trust us, some of these revelations will leave you speechless. Ready to separate fact from fiction? Let's dive in. Now let's tackle the first myth head on: the idea that Pegasus burst forth from Medusa's blood when Perseus beheaded her. It's a dramatic image, one that's been immortalized in paintings and sculptures for centuries. But here's the thing: that version isn't the whole story. In older, lesser-known myths, Pegasus was actually the offspring of Poseidon and Medusa, conceived long before her tragic transformation into a gorgon. So why does the blood-born version stick in our minds? Blame the artists. Renaissance painters, obsessed with dramatic moments, latched onto the idea of Pegasus emerging from Medusa's neck as a symbol of poetic rebirth. Over time, their breathtaking canvases overshadowed the original tale, turning a divine lineage into a spectacle of gore and glory. But the truth: Pegasus wasn't just a miraculous afterthought, he was a god's son from the start. Now let's shift gears and take a closer look at another popular misconception: that Pegasus was always a shining symbol of goodness and purity. While it's true he's often portrayed as a noble creature, ancient myths paint a more complex picture. Pegasus wasn't just a gentle steed for heroes, he had a wild, unpredictable side too. In some lesser-known stories, he's ridden by figures associated with chaos or destruction, showing that his power wasn't always used for virtuous ends. Even his partnership with Bellerophon, often seen as heroic, took a dark turn when the hero's arrogance led to his downfall. And let's not forget, Pegasus was born from Medusa, a figure of terror, and sired by Poseidon, the god of storms and earthquakes. That divine lineage hints at a nature that's as tempestuous as it is majestic. So while Pegasus might soar through our imaginations as a symbol of inspiration, the myths remind us that even the most radiant legends have shadows. Now, let's tackle another fascinating myth: the idea that Pegasus could fly forever without ever needing a break. While it's easy to imagine this majestic creature soaring endlessly through the skies, the truth is far more grounded. Ancient myths actually show Pegasus needing to rest, just like any other living being. Take the story of Bellerophon's quest to defeat the chimera. Pegasus didn't fly non-stop. He had to land, recover, and even drink from magical springs to regain his strength. And let's not forget the time Zeus himself had to intervene, striking Bellerophon down when his arrogance pushed Pegasus too hard. Even a divine winged horse has limits. Now, here's where it gets funny: compare Pegasus to real-world horses. Anyone who's been around horses knows they need plenty of rest, food, and water. They're powerful, sure, but they're not machines. So why would Pegasus, born from a horse and a god, be any different? If anything, flying would take even more energy. Imagine the calories burned flapping those massive wings. The next time you see Pegasus depicted as some tireless sky engine, just picture him making a pit stop for a snack and a nap. Even legends need their downtime. This myth might stem from our love of the extraordinary, but the reality makes Pegasus more relatable and, honestly, more impressive. He wasn't just a magical taxi service for heroes. He was a living, breathing creature with limits, and that's what makes his feats all the more awe-inspiring. Up next, we'll explore another surprising twist. Pegasus wasn't just Bellerophon's ride. Other figures in myth tamed him too, and the evidence might surprise you. Here's the next layer of the legend. While Bellerophon might be the most famous figure to ride Pegasus, he wasn't the only one. Ancient myths and art reveal a surprising truth. Pegasus had other riders, some just as extraordinary. Take the Muses, for example. These goddesses of inspiration were said to have tamed Pegasus, using his flight to reach the heights of Mount Helicon, where they created the sacred Hippocrene spring with a strike of his hoof. Imagine that, a winged horse not just for battle but for poetry and art. Then there's the evidence staring back at us from ancient Greek pottery. Vase paintings from centuries ago show warriors and heroes atop Pegasus, their identities lost to time but their stories preserved in clay. These artworks shatter the idea that Bellerophon had some exclusive contract with the winged stallion. If anything, Pegasus was more like a divine Uber, available to those worthy enough to earn his trust. What's really fascinating is how these lesser-known riders change our view of Pegasus. He wasn't just a one-hero steed, he was a symbol of potential, a bridge between the earthly and the divine for anyone bold or clever enough to reach for him. And that's the thing about myths, they're never as simple as they seem. Up next, we'll dive into another twist, the idea that Pegasus created every water source with his hooves. Spoiler, it's not quite that straightforward. Now let's tackle another fascinating twist in the Pegasus legend, the idea that every water source on Earth was born from his hooves. It's a poetic image, sure, but the truth is far more nuanced. While Pegasus did famously create the Hippocrene spring with a single strike of his hoof, a magical wellspring said to inspire poets and artists, he wasn't the sole architect of all water in mythology. Take the Pierian spring, for example. This sacred site, linked to the Muses, had its own origin story, untouched by Pegasus. Then there's the Deus spring in Thebes, tied to the tragic tale of a queen transformed into water. These stories remind us that ancient myths celebrated many sources of divine or natural water, each with its own unique backstory. So why does the myth of Pegasus as the universal water bringer persist? It's likely because his connection to the Hippocrene spring was so iconic. That one act, creating a fountain of inspiration, overshadowed the rest, simplifying his role into something grand but inaccurate. In reality, Pegasus wasn't a one-trick pony. His divine ties were more about bridging realms earth and sky, mortal and muse, than single-handedly shaping the world's geography. This myth also hints at how we tend to streamline legends over time, turning complex figures into simple symbols. Pegasus wasn't just a magical plumber. He was a multifaceted creature whose stories intertwined with gods, heroes, and even the land itself. Next up, we'll explore another misconception, that Pegasus was the only winged horse in Greek myth. Trust me, the skies were far busier than you might think. Now, let's take flight into another myth that's been soaring through the ages, the idea that Pegasus was the only winged horse in Greek mythology. While he's certainly the most famous, the ancient skies were bustling with other divine steeds, each with their own stories and significance. Take Arion, for instance. This swift, immortal horse was said to be the offspring of Poseidon and Demeter, and he played a key role in the adventures of heroes like Adrastus. Unlike Pegasus, who often symbolized inspiration and divine connection, Arion was more of a battle companion, known for his unmatched speed and strength. Then there are the steeds of the dawn, the fiery horses that pulled the chariot of Eos, the goddess of the morning. These radiant creatures, like Ethon and Phlegon, were responsible for bringing the sun's light across the sky, a far cry from Pegasus's role as a muse's mount or a hero's steed. So why does Pegasus overshadow the rest? Part of it comes down to storytelling. Pegasus's tales are tightly woven into some of mythology's most dramatic moments, like Bellerophon's battle with the Chimera, while others, like Arion, are more niche. Plus, Pegasus's transformation into a constellation cemented his legacy in the stars, literally elevating him above the competition. But these other winged horses remind us that mythology is rarely about singular icons. It's a tapestry of creatures, each serving a unique purpose in the grand narrative. Next, we'll tackle another layer of Pegasus's legend, the belief that he was immortal from birth. As you'll see, even that story has more twists than a mountain path. Now, let's dive into another fascinating layer of Pegasus's legend, the idea that he was immortal from the moment he was born. While it's easy to assume a creature as divine as Pegasus would naturally live forever, the truth is a bit more nuanced. In some versions of the myth, Pegasus wasn't born immortal at all. Instead, it was Zeus who later granted him eternal life, transforming him into the constellation we see in the night sky. This twist in the tale reveals something deeper about how ancient cultures viewed divinity. Immortality wasn't just a given, it was a reward, a gift bestowed by the gods for extraordinary deeds or loyalty. Pegasus earned his place among the stars, much like heroes such as Hercules or Perseus. It wasn't automatic, it was a recognition of his role in myths, like aiding Bellerophon or creating the Hippocrene spring. The confusion around Pegasus's immortality likely stems from modern retellings that simplify his story. In older texts, his divine status evolves, reflecting the Greek belief that even mythical beings had to prove their worth. This contrasts with creatures like the gods themselves, who are inherently eternal. Pegasus's journey from mortal steed to celestial symbol mirrors the human aspiration for transcendence, something earned, not inherited. So next time you look up at the constellation Pegasus, remember, his immortality wasn't a birthright. It was a testament to his legend, shaped by the will of the gods and the stories that kept him alive in the heavens. And speaking of divine gifts, our next myth explores whether Pegasus and unicorns share any connection. A modern mix-up that's more tangled than you might think. Now let's untangle a modern myth that's taken flight literally. The idea that Pegasus and unicorns are somehow related is a classic case of mythic mix-up. While both creatures are magical and beloved in fantasy, their origins couldn't be more different. Pegasus hails from ancient Greek mythology, born from the blood of Medusa and tied to the gods, while unicorns have roots in ancient Mesopotamian and Indian lore, often symbolizing purity and healing. Medieval bestiaries, those illustrated encyclopedias of mythical beasts, make the distinction crystal clear. Pegasus appears as a winged horse, a celestial being linked to poetry and divine inspiration. Unicorns, on the other hand, are depicted as earthbound, horned creatures, sometimes even as allegories for Christ in Christian symbolism. The confusion likely sprouted in modern pop culture, where fantasy stories and artwork began blending traits of both creatures for dramatic effect. Here's the kicker: Pegasus never had a horn, and unicorns never had wings. Their myths evolved separately, serving entirely different roles in their respective cultures. Pegasus soared through heroic tales, while unicorns guarded forests or healed with their horns. Even their symbolism diverged. Pegasus represented freedom and transcendence, while unicorns stood for innocence and untamed nature. So why does this myth persist? Blame it on the allure of combining two iconic creatures into something even more fantastical. But the truth is, their stories are richer when kept distinct. And speaking of distinct, our next myth tackles another colorful misconception: whether Pegasus was always portrayed as Snow White, or if ancient artists imagined him in more vibrant hues. Now let's brush away another layer of misconception, this time about Pegasus's color. The idea that he was always depicted as pure white is a modern simplification, one that Hollywood has happily embraced. But ancient texts and artworks tell a far more colorful story. In early Greek poetry, Pegasus is often described as golden or radiant, his coat shimmering like sunlight. Some versions even paint him with multi-hued wings, reflecting his divine lineage as the offspring of Poseidon and Medusa. This wasn't just artistic flair, color symbolism mattered deeply in ancient myths. Gold represented divinity and celestial power, tying Pegasus to the gods rather than just being a pretty horse with wings. So where did the snow-white image come from? Blame later European art and, of course, Hollywood. White became shorthand for purity and heroism in Western storytelling, so filmmakers and illustrators leaned into it, erasing the richer palette of the original myths. It's a classic case of cultural whitewashing, simplifying a complex symbol into something more marketable. But here's the twist: even in antiquity, artists played with Pegasus's appearance. Some vase paintings show him with dark or dappled coats, proving that creativity wasn't limited to modern retellings. The real myth isn't about a single color. It's about a creature as dynamic and varied as the stories he inspired. And speaking of inspiration, our next myth dives into whether Pegasus actually fought in the Titanomachy, or if that's another tall tale tacked onto his legendary resume. Now, let's tackle another fascinating mix-up. Did Pegasus really charge into battle during the Titanomachy, the epic war between the Titans and the Olympians? The short answer, no, but the myth persists, and here's why. First, the timeline simply doesn't add up. Pegasus was born from Medusa's blood after Perseus beheaded her, an event that happened long after the Titanomachy had ended. By the time Pegasus took his first flight, Zeus and the Olympians had already claimed victory, and the Titans were locked away in Tartarus. So unless Pegasus had a time-traveling stable, he couldn't have been there. Yet, you'll still find this myth popping up in movies, games, and even some modern retellings. Why? Because blending iconic elements sells. The Titanomachy was a grand, cinematic conflict, and tossing a winged horse into the mix makes it even more dramatic. It's the same reason we see Zeus throwing lightning bolts in scenes where, historically, he wouldn't. Artistic liberty loves a spectacle. Ancient poets like Hesiod never mentioned Pegasus in the Titanomachy, but later writers and artists sometimes mashed up myths for flair. Even today, pop culture loves to compress timelines or merge characters to streamline stories. Think of it like a highlight reel. Pegasus is such a recognizable symbol of Greek myth that writers can't resist slotting him into the greatest hits of divine battles. But here's the fun part. While Pegasus didn't fight in the Titanomachy, his brother Chrysaor, born alongside him from Medusa's blood, was a warrior. Some versions even link Chrysaor to the giants who later challenged the gods. So if you're craving a family connection to epic battles, look to Pegasus's sibling instead. Up next, we'll explore whether Pegasus could actually chat with humans, or if that's another myth taking flight. Now, let's clear up another intriguing question. Could Pegasus actually speak human languages? The answer might surprise you. While many mythical creatures like dragons or sphinxes are known for their eloquence, Pegasus wasn't exactly chatting away in ancient Greek. In most classical myths, Pegasus never speaks directly to humans. Instead, his communication is more subtle. Think divine whispers or telepathic nudges. For example, when Bellerophon needed guidance to tame him, it was the goddess Athena who stepped in, not Pegasus himself. She provided the golden bridle, a tool of control, not conversation. This aligns with Pegasus's role as a celestial being, a creature of awe, not dialogue. That said, there are a few later tales where Pegasus seems to understand human intentions, almost as if he's reading minds. But even then, it's less about speech and more about a mystical connection, often tied to his divine lineage. Compare this to other talking beasts in mythology, like the Sphinx with her riddles or the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Those creatures used words as weapons or tests, while Pegasus remained silent, his power lying in his flight and symbolism, not his vocabulary. Interestingly, this myth might stem from modern retellings that anthropomorphize animals, giving them human traits to make them more relatable. But in ancient texts, Pegasus's silence speaks volumes. He's a force of nature, not a conversationalist. Up next, we'll unravel whether Pegasus was truly a gift from Athena to Bellerophon, or if that's another twist in his legendary tale. Now, let's tackle another fascinating twist in Pegasus's story. Was he really a gift from Athena to Bellerophon? The answer isn't as straightforward as you might think. While Athena's involvement is one of the most famous versions, it's far from the only one. In some myths, Bellerophon doesn't wait for divine intervention. Instead, he proves his worth by taming Pegasus himself, showcasing his skill and bravery. This version paints Bellerophon as a true hero, earning his legendary steed through sheer determination. Then there's the lesser-known twist where Poseidon, Pegasus's divine father, plays a role. Some stories suggest Poseidon either guided Bellerophon to Pegasus or even gifted the winged horse directly, tying the myth back to Pegasus's oceanic origins. So where does Athena fit in? Her most famous contribution is the golden bridle, a tool that symbolizes control and divine favor. But even here, her role varies. Sometimes she hands it to Bellerophon in a dream. Other times he finds it at a temple, implying her indirect blessing rather than an outright gift. This ambiguity highlights how myths evolve. Gods and heroes shift roles depending on the storyteller's focus. Athena's presence in the myth isn't just about the bridle, though. She's often seen as a protector of heroes, and her association with wisdom and strategy aligns with Bellerophon's cleverness in taming Pegasus. Yet, Poseidon's connection reminds us that Pegasus isn't just a mount, he's a divine being with roots in the sea god's power. Next up, we'll take a closer look at Pegasus's wings. Were they feathered like a bird's, or something far more mystical? The answer might change how you picture this legendary creature forever. Now, let's spread our wings and dive into one of the most visually striking aspects of Pegasus's wings. Were they really just giant bird wings or something far more extraordinary? The truth is, ancient artists and storytellers couldn't quite agree, and their interpretations reveal a lot about how they viewed divinity itself. Some of the earliest depictions, like those on Greek vases, show Pegasus with wings that look almost identical to a bird's, feathered, layered, and meticulously detailed. This makes sense since birds were the only flying creatures people saw daily. But here's where it gets interesting. Other artists took a more mystical approach, painting his wings as shimmering, almost translucent, like they were made of light or energy. These versions leaned into Pegasus's divine nature, suggesting his wings weren't just physical tools for flight but symbols of his otherworldly power. Then there are the rare but fascinating portrayals where his wings seem to shift form, sometimes solid, sometimes wispy, as if they weren't bound by earthly rules at all. This fluidity reflects how ancient cultures saw the divine, not fixed or predictable, but awe-inspiring and beyond human understanding. So why does this matter? Because every artistic choice tells us something about the people behind the myth. Feathered wings grounded Pegasus in the familiar, while ethereal ones lifted him into the realm of pure legend. Either way, his wings weren't just for flying, they were a canvas for humanity's imagination about what it means to be truly divine. Next up, we'll soar even higher into Pegasus's legacy. How did his story become written in the stars? The answer might surprise you. Now, let's turn our gaze upward to the stars, where Pegasus's story takes a celestial twist. You might assume that the moment Pegasus left the earthly realm, he was instantly immortalized as a constellation, but the truth is far more intriguing. Ancient myths actually suggest a gap between his death and his place in the night sky, revealing how legends evolve over time. In some versions of the myth, Pegasus served Zeus faithfully as a thunderbolt bearer before his eventual retirement, or, in other tales, his peaceful passing. Only then did Zeus honor him by placing him among the stars. This delay highlights a fascinating cultural detail. Immortality in the stars wasn't always immediate. It was a reward, a final act of recognition from the gods. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Long before the Greeks linked Pegasus to the constellation we know today, Babylonian astronomers had their own interpretations of those same stars. To them, this patch of sky represented a divine horse, but one tied to their own myths and gods. This overlap shows how different cultures projected their stories onto the cosmos, weaving their own narratives into the same celestial canvas. So why does this myth of instant constellation status persist? Likely because it's a more dramatic ending, a swift ascent to glory. But the reality reminds us that myths, like the stars themselves, shift and change across time and cultures. Pegasus's journey to the heavens wasn't just a single event. It was a layered process shaped by countless storytellers under countless skies. Next, we'll explore another surprising twist: how Pegasus, despite his divine connections, wasn't actually worshipped as a god. The reasons might challenge what you think you know about ancient reverence. Now, let's clear up a common misconception: Pegasus wasn't actually worshipped as a god. While he was undeniably revered, his role in ancient mythology was more symbolic than divine. Unlike deities such as Poseidon, who had dedicated cults and temples where people offered sacrifices and prayers, Pegasus was celebrated as a powerful emblem of inspiration, freedom, and the untamed sky. Think of it this way: Pegasus was like a legendary hero's trusted steed, admired and immortalized in stories, but not the focus of worship. The Greeks honored him through art, poetry, and the occasional mention in hymns, but there's no evidence of altars or rituals dedicated solely to him. Instead, his legacy lived on as a bridge between the mortal and divine worlds, a creature of myth that captured imaginations without demanding devotion. This stands in stark contrast to actual horse cults like those surrounding Poseidon, the god of horses and the sea. In cities like Athens and Corinth, Poseidon was venerated with grand festivals, chariot races, and even horse sacrifices. These practices show how deeply intertwined horses were with divine worship in Greek culture, but Pegasus himself never quite reached that status, so why the confusion? Part of it comes from modern retellings that blur the lines between myth and religion. Pegasus's awe-inspiring presence and his connection to gods like Zeus might make it easy to assume he was a deity. But the truth is, he was something perhaps even more fascinating, a symbol so potent that he didn't need temples to secure his place in history. Next up, we'll tackle another myth that reshapes Pegasus's origins: the idea that his parents were mere mortals. You won't believe how far this misconception strays from the ancient texts. Now, let's set the record straight on Pegasus's origins, because no, his parents weren't just regular folks. The idea that Pegasus sprang from mortal bloodlines is a modern twist that couldn't be further from the ancient myths. In reality, his lineage was as divine as it gets. His father was Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, and his mother was Medusa, the infamous Gorgon whose gaze could turn men to stone. That's right, Pegasus wasn't just a magical horse. He was born from two of mythology's most powerful figures. So why do some stories try to humanize him? It's likely an attempt to make Pegasus more relatable, stripping away the grandeur of his divine roots for a simpler, earthbound tale. But here's the thing: myths aren't meant to be watered down. They're larger than life for a reason. Imagine taking Hercules and saying, "Oh, he was just a really strong guy," instead of the son of Zeus. It robs the story of its magic. The same goes for Pegasus. His connection to Poseidon and Medusa isn't just trivia. It's what makes his birth as extraordinary as his flight. Speaking of Medusa, let's clear up another mix-up. Some versions claim Pegasus burst from her blood after Perseus beheaded her, but even that moment was steeped in divinity. Medusa herself was once a beautiful priestess transformed by Athena's curse, and Poseidon's involvement ties Pegasus to the gods from the start. Modern retellings might skip these details for brevity, but they're the heart of what makes Pegasus a legend, not a fairy tale, but a myth woven into the fabric of the divine. Next, we'll take on a myth that's straight out of a sci-fi novel: the wild claim that Pegasus could time travel. Trust me, the truth is even more fascinating. Now, let's tackle one of the most outlandish myths about Pegasus, the idea that he could time travel. Some modern retellings, especially those influenced by New Age interpretations, have painted Pegasus as some kind of cosmic time hopper, zipping through centuries at will. But here's the reality: Pegasus was a creature of the skies, not a temporal adventurer. His role in myth was clear. He was a divine steed, carrying heroes and gods across the heavens, not rewriting history. To debunk this, let's turn to the oldest sources we have, like the Homeric hymns. These ancient texts describe Pegasus as a swift, majestic flyer, but there's not a single mention of him bending time. His power was in his wings, not in some sci-fi ability to leap through eras. The confusion might come from his association with the Muses, who inspired art and poetry timeless in their own way. But that's a metaphorical connection, not a literal one. Think about it. If Pegasus could time travel, why didn't he warn Bellerophon about his doomed flight to Olympus? Or why didn't he pop up in other major myths to alter events? The answer's simple: because that was never his role. Pegasus belonged to the realm of legend, not fantasy tropes. His magic was in his flight, his connection to the gods, and the springs he created with a strike of his hoof, not in hopping between timelines. So next time you hear someone claim Pegasus was a time traveler, remember the truth is far more grounded, even if it's still utterly mythical. Up next, we'll unravel the real meaning behind Pegasus's name, because no, it doesn't translate to thunder like some myths suggest. Now let's clear up another common mix-up, this time about Pegasus's name. You might have heard claims that it means thunder, painting him as some storm-bringing powerhouse. But that's not quite right. The truth: Pegasus's name has roots in ancient Greek words tied to spring or strong, reflecting his connection to the magical springs he created and his divine strength. Linguistic studies point to the Greek word P-A-macron-G letter 1, A-1-7, meaning spring or water source, which makes perfect sense when you remember how Pegasus struck the ground to create the Hippocrene spring. Other interpretations suggest links to words like strong or steadfast, highlighting his role as a mighty, untamable steed. So where did the thunder idea come from? Likely from later mistranslations or creative liberties that blurred his ties to Poseidon, the god of the sea. And yes, storms, but that's a stretch. Think about it. If Pegasus's name truly meant thunder, wouldn't ancient texts describe him crackling with lightning or shaking the skies? Instead, they focus on his grace, his flight, and those life-giving springs. The thunder myth might sound exciting, but it's just another case of modern retellings jazzing up the original lore. Up next, we'll explore how exclusive Pegasus really was as a mount, because despite what some stories suggest, he wasn't just handing out rides to any hero who asked. Now, let's tackle another misconception: this idea that Pegasus was some kind of ancient Uber for heroes, handing out rides left and right. The truth: Pegasus was anything but common. In fact, beyond the famous partnership with Bellerophon, there are only a handful of myths where other figures even come close to riding him. Take the Muses, for example. Some stories suggest they occasionally borrowed Pegasus for poetic inspiration, but even those tales are rare and often vague. Then there's the occasional warrior or demigod who claims to have tamed him, but these accounts are usually later additions, more like fan fiction than core mythology. The reality is, Pegasus wasn't just picky. His exclusivity was part of what made him legendary. Think about it. If every hero could hop on Pegasus and soar into battle, he'd lose that divine mystique. Instead, his rarity elevated him. He wasn't just a horse with wings, he was a symbol of favor, a creature so extraordinary that only the most worthy, or the luckiest, could even dream of riding him. That's why Bellerophon's story stands out. It wasn't just about the hero, it was about the sheer improbability of taming something so untouchable. So next time you hear someone say Pegasus was the go-to mount for ancient heroes, remember, he wasn't handing out joyride. His legend thrived because he was almost impossible to claim. Coming up, we'll dive into another weather-related myth because apparently, some people think Pegasus didn't just fly, he brought storms with him. Now, let's clear the skies on this next myth because apparently, some folks believe Pegasus didn't just fly through the clouds, he created them. The idea that his wings whipped up storms sounds dramatic, but here's the twist: Pegasus wasn't some mythical weather machine. Sure, it's easy to see where the confusion comes from. His dad, Poseidon, ruled the seas and the storms, so it's natural to assume his winged son inherited a bit of that chaos. But in the actual myths, Pegasus's flights were more about grace than gale force. When he soared, it wasn't thunder rumbling in his wake, it was the sound of awe from everyone below. That said, there's a deeper layer here. The storm connection isn't entirely random. In ancient symbolism, flight often represented freedom from earthly struggles, while storms stood for divine anger or upheaval. So when artists or poets linked Pegasus to tempests, they were probably hinting at his connection to the god's power, not claiming he was out there summoning hurricanes. Think of it like this: Pegasus wasn't the storm. He was the break in the clouds, the moment of clarity after the chaos. And that's a far more fitting role for a creature born to inspire, not destroy. Up next, we'll tackle a myth that's straight out of a fantasy novel because some stories claim Pegasus didn't just ascend to the stars, he came back to life. Now, let's set the record straight on a myth that sounds more like a superhero reboot than ancient legend: the idea that Pegasus was resurrected after death. Some modern retellings love to give him a dramatic comeback, but the original myths tell a very different story. When Pegasus met his end, he didn't rise from the ashes or trot back to life. Instead, Zeus honored him by placing him among the stars, transforming him into the constellation we still see today. This wasn't a temporary promotion, it was a permanent ascension, a divine reward for his service and nobility. The confusion might come from mixing up myths. Creatures like the phoenix are famous for their cycles of death and rebirth, but Pegasus, his story was about elevation, not resurrection. Where the phoenix symbolizes renewal, Pegasus represents eternal glory, a celestial monument rather than a recurring legend. Think of it this way: Pegasus didn't need a second act. His legacy was sealed in the night sky, a constant reminder of the heights he reached literally and mythically. And honestly, that's a far more fitting end for a creature who spent his life defying the ordinary. Coming up next, we'll tackle a myth that pits Pegasus against an unlikely foe because some stories insist he had a fiery rivalry with dragons. But as you'll see, the truth is stranger than fiction. Now, let's take flight into another myth that feels ripped straight from a fantasy epic: the idea that Pegasus had some legendary rivalry with dragons. It's a thrilling image, sure, a winged horse locked in battle against a fire-breathing beast. But here's the twist: you won't find that showdown in ancient Greek myths. Dragons and Pegasus barely crossed paths in the original stories. Greek mythology had its share of dragons, like the monstrous python or the hydra, but Pegasus wasn't part of those battles. His adventures were more about heroism and divine missions, not dragon-slaying duels. So where did this fiery feud come from? Blame modern fantasy, especially games like Dungeons and Dragons. In those worlds, mixing mythical creatures is part of the fun, and Pegasus vs. dragons became a popular trope. But in the classical tales, they were more like distant neighbors than sworn enemies. Think of it this way: Pegasus was a celestial steed soaring through the heavens, while dragons were often earthbound terrors. Their realms didn't overlap much. The rivalry is a creative liberty, one that's exciting but not rooted in the original myths. Up next, we'll untangle another modern twist on Pegasus's legend: the claim that his tears had magical healing powers. But as we'll see, the ancient sources tell a different story. Now, let's glide into another enchanting but misleading myth: the belief that Pegasus's tears had miraculous healing powers. It's a poetic idea, evoking images of a divine horse whose sorrow could mend wounds or cure ailments. But here's the reality check: ancient texts never mention this ability. You might recall stories like Achilles' spear, which could both harm and heal, but Pegasus's tears, that's a modern invention. Greek mythology is rich with magical objects and divine gifts, yet Pegasus's tears aren't among them. So why does this myth persist? Much of it stems from New Age reinterpretations, where ancient symbols are often repurposed with new meanings. Pegasus, as a creature of purity and grace, became a canvas for modern spiritual ideas, including the notion that his tears held power. It's a beautiful thought, but not one you'll find in Hesiod or Ovid. Think of it like this: Pegasus's real magic lay in his connection to the gods and the heavens, not in his biology. His legacy is about inspiration, not literal healing. And while the idea of his tears might add drama to stories today, it's a twist that belongs to our era, not the ancient world. Coming up, we'll tackle another creative liberty, the claim that Pegasus could shapeshift. But as we'll soon see, classical myths kept him firmly in winged horse form. Now let's set the record straight on another creative twist, the idea that Pegasus could shapeshift. It's a fun fantasy, imagining him morphing into different forms, but classical mythology paints a very different picture. Pegasus was, and always remained, a winged horse. No transformations, no disguises, just pure, soaring equine majesty. This myth likely sprouted from mixing up Pegasus with other shape-shifting figures from Greek lore, like Proteus, the sea god who could change forms at will. Or maybe it's the influence of modern fantasy, where magical creatures often bend their shapes. But in the original texts, Pegasus's form was as fixed as the stars he eventually joined. Think about it, his role in myths was tied to his identity as a winged horse carrying heroes, creating springs with his hooves and ascending to the heavens. Shape-shifting would have muddled that symbolism. The ancients valued clarity in their myths, and Pegasus's consistent form reinforced his divine purpose. So next time you hear someone claim Pegasus could turn into a dragon or a cloud, remember, that's creative license, not classical canon. Up next, we'll explore another intriguing mix-up, the belief that Pegasus guarded the underworld. But as we'll see, his true domain was far brighter. Now, let's tackle another fascinating misconception, the idea that Pegasus was a guardian of the underworld. While it's easy to see how someone might imagine the winged horse lurking in shadowy realms, the truth is far more celestial. Pegasus belonged to the skies, not the underworld. His home was among the gods on Mount Olympus, where he served as a divine steed and a symbol of inspiration. So where did this underworld myth come from? It might stem from a mix-up with his brother Chrysaor, who was often linked to darker, more martial themes. Chrysaor, born alongside Pegasus from Medusa's blood, carried a golden sword and had ties to the underworld in some interpretations. But Pegasus, his role was about elevation, not descent. He carried heroes to greatness, created life-giving springs, and ultimately became a constellation far from the realm of the dead. That said, there's a subtle connection worth noting. In ancient mythology, winged creatures often played psychopomp roles, guiding souls between worlds. While Pegasus himself wasn't a guardian of the underworld, his brother's associations and the broader symbolism of flight might have blurred the lines over time. But make no mistake, Pegasus's legacy is one of light, not shadows. Up next, we'll clear up another tangled myth, this time about Pegasus and the hero Perseus. You might be surprised how often these two get confused. Now, let's untangle another myth that's been flying around for far too long, the idea that Pegasus was a gift to Perseus. At first glance, it seems plausible. Both are legendary figures from Greek mythology, and both have connections to winged beings. But here's the twist: Perseus and Pegasus never crossed paths in the original myths. The confusion likely comes from mixing up their stories. Perseus, famous for slaying Medusa, did ride a winged creature, but it wasn't Pegasus. He used the winged sandals of Hermes to soar through the skies. Meanwhile, Pegasus was born from Medusa's blood after her death, meaning he couldn't have existed while Perseus was alive. The timelines simply don't match up. To put it plainly, Pegasus was still in the womb, or rather, in the aftermath of Medusa's demise when Perseus was completing his heroic feats. By the time Pegasus took flight, Perseus was long gone, ruling as a king or enjoying his place among the stars. It's a classic case of mythic mashups where two iconic tales get blended over time. So next time you hear someone claim Perseus rode Pegasus, you'll know the truth. These two legends belong to different chapters of the mythic saga. Up ahead, we'll tackle another curious claim, this time about Pegasus's shadow and whether it had the power to grant invisibility. Stay tuned. Now, let's take a step into the realm of pure imagination where even Pegasus's shadow gets a mythical upgrade. Some stories claim that stepping into his shadow could make you invisible. Sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel, right? Well, that's because it is. This idea likely sprouted from a mix-up with Plato's famous allegories, where shadows symbolize illusions or hidden truths. But applying that to Pegasus, that's a stretch even for Greek mythology. Scholars have pointed out that there's zero evidence in ancient texts linking Pegasus to invisibility. His role was clear: a divine steed, a spring creator, a constellation, not a magical cloak dispenser. The invisibility myth probably gained traction from later creative retellings, where authors and artists took liberties to spice up the legend. It's a fun idea, sure, but it's about as accurate as saying Pegasus moonlighted as a stand-up comedian. The truth, his shadow was just that, a shadow. No hidden powers, no vanishing acts. So why does this myth persist? Maybe because we love the idea of ordinary things holding extraordinary secrets. But when it comes to Pegasus, the real magic lies in his actual myths, not the invented ones. Up next, we'll explore how Pegasus became tangled in another surprising misconception, this time as a symbol of death. Stay with us. Now, let's shift gears and tackle a darker twist in Pegasus's story, the idea that he symbolized death. At first glance, it seems completely at odds with his most famous feat, striking the ground to create the Hippocrene spring, a source of poetic inspiration and life. So where did this grim association come from? The answer lies in the artistic interpretations of the Renaissance. During this period, artists often played with symbolism, blending classical myths with new meanings. Some painters and sculptors began depicting Pegasus alongside themes of mortality, perhaps drawing a loose connection between his ascension to the stars and the human soul's journey after death. But here's the catch: this was purely a creative choice, not something rooted in ancient myth. In Greek lore, Pegasus was far from a harbinger of doom. His ties were to the divine, to creativity, and to the heavens. Even his brother Chrysaor, often linked to the underworld, didn't drag Pegasus into that realm. The life-giving spring he created stands as the clearest rebuttal to the death symbolism myth. So why did Renaissance artists lean into this darker angle? It might have been their way of exploring duality, the balance between life and death, earth and sky. But for the ancient Greeks, Pegasus was a creature of elevation, not endings. Up next, we'll debunk a myth that's straight out of the history books, or rather not. Was Pegasus really the inspiration behind the first airplanes? Let's find out. Now, let's take flight with a myth that's more modern than ancient, the idea that Pegasus inspired the first airplanes. It's a charming thought, imagining early aviators looking to the winged horse for inspiration as they sketched their blueprints. But here's the twist: if we're talking mythical flight, the real credit goes to Daedalus, the master craftsman who built wings for himself and his son Icarus. Their story, with its wax and feathers, is the closest thing Greek myth offers to early aviation. Of course, Pegasus's soaring elegance might have captured imaginations, but historical records tell a different tale. Inventors like Leonardo da Vinci studied birds, not winged horses, for their designs. and by the time the Wright brothers took to the skies, their inspiration came from kites and gliders, not ancient legends. That said, it's easy to see why Pegasus gets lumped into the conversation. His image embodies the freedom and wonder of flight. So while Pegasus didn't directly influence the mechanics of aviation, he certainly fueled the dream of it. After all, who wouldn't want to ride a creature that turns the sky into a playground? Up next, we'll tackle our final myth, the whimsical claim that Pegasus still roams the earth today. Spoiler, it's a story as tall as his wingspan. Now, let's land on our final myth, one that's equal parts whimsy and wishful thinking. The idea that Pegasus still gallops across our world today, hidden in remote valleys or glimpsed in fleeting moments, is a story that refuses to fade. It's the kind of tale that thrives in the same space as Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster, fueled by a mix of cryptid fascination and sheer longing for magic to be real. Reports of Pegasus sightings often follow a familiar pattern: a blurry photo, a second-hand account from a traveler, or a campfire story passed down through generations. But here's the thing, unlike creatures rooted in regional folklore, Pegasus's mythos is firmly tied to ancient Greece. There's no historical tradition of him slipping into our world unnoticed. Yet, that hasn't stopped modern dreamers from weaving him into their own legends. Maybe it's the enduring allure of flight, or the childlike hope that mythical beings could still walk among us. Either way, these sightings say more about us than they do about Pegasus. They're a testament to how deeply his legend has embedded itself in our collective imagination, not as a hidden creature, but as a symbol of wonder we just can't let go of. And with that, we've saddled up and ridden through all 30 myths, separating hoofbeats from hearsay. From his divine birth to his celestial retirement, Pegasus's story is a reminder that even the wildest legends have roots in something real, even if that something isn't quite what we've been told. So, which myth surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the myths that shape our world. Until next time, keep looking to the skies. You never know what might inspire you. Now, as we bring our journey through these 30 myths to a close, it's clear that Pegasus is far more than just a winged horse from ancient tales. His story has taken flight across centuries, transforming from a divine symbol in Greek mythology to a beloved icon in modern pop culture. Each myth we've unraveled today, whether it's about his origins, his powers, or his enduring presence, shows how legends adapt and grow, shaped by the hopes and imaginations of every generation that retells them. What makes Pegasus truly timeless isn't just the magic of his wings, but the way he reflects our own desires to soar above limits, to find wonder in the unknown, and to believe in something greater than ourselves. From poetry to blockbuster films, his image evolves, yet the core of his myth remains a bridge between the earthly and the divine. So, as we wrap up, I'd love to hear from you. Which Pegasus myth captivated you the most? Did any of these revelations change how you see his legend? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation flying. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into myth and mystery, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an adventure. Thanks for riding along, and until next time, keep chasing the stories that inspire you. Who knows, the next myth waiting to be uncovered might just be your favorite.